Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 901 for October 4th, 2021. Coming up in a few minutes.
Probably for the first time ever, Mark, I've designed a whiskey around a design of a packaging. I've never done it that way before. I've always when I make a whiskey, we design a whiskey, we make a whiskey, we formulate it together, and then marketing and packaging development, then go and build it around it.
Sandy Hyslop is the master blender for Royal Salute and all of the Chivas Brothers whiskies, and that Bespoke whiskey is the latest Royal Salute. It's a special 21-year-old blend with a flagon created by British designer Richard Quinn for the new Couture Collection.
I've got Strathyla, I've got Dumbarton Single Grain, Capardonic, Imperial, lots of distilleries that no longer exist, but also the key and hidden fingerprint in here is Distillery. That is the one that's bringing that flavour.
What's that distillery and the flavour? Keep listening. Our conversation is coming up later on WhiskyCast In-Depth, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, behind the label, and more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
What do Japan and Scotland have in common? You guessed it, whiskey. That's why Dewar's brought these two cultures together in our newest cast series innovation, introducing Dewar's 8-year Japanese Smooth. We took the Dewar's you know and love and finished it in rare Mizunara oak casks for a complex and balanced Scotch whiskey like no other.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
So, in Spain, they call Redbreast Petit Roco. It's me, but a touch more exotic. Kind of like a Redbreast PX edition. Finished in Pedro Jimenez casks, adding a velvety and decadent dimension. You know, I won't lie, a climate like this makes me wish I was a migratory bird.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the news. Last Monday morning, John Campbell announced his plans to step down as Laphroaig's distillery manager after nearly 16 years and 27 years at the distillery. He was Laphroaig's longest tenured distillery manager ever and is currently the most senior distillery manager on the island. In his email to Friends of Laphroaig members, he said he's been traveling between Islay and the Scottish mainland for the last 2 years, since his family has been living on the mainland. He's decided to move to the mainland permanently and will be joining what he called an independent distillery company. His successor has not been named, and John will remain at Laphroaig until mid-November. He asked that we hold off on an interview until then. The Heaven Hill strike is in its third week and getting ugly. There's been no progress in settling the contract dispute between Heaven Hill and Local 23D of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. Union leaders are accusing Heaven Hill of refusing to negotiate. The two sides met with a federal mediator on Monday, and the UFCW accused Heaven Hill of refusing to continue negotiations on Wednesday, as requested by the mediator. In a statement emailed to WhiskyCast, Heaven Hill called last Monday's meeting the, quote, start of an ongoing dialogue, and said the company will continue to work, quote, collaboratively with the union leadership. That followed a court hearing the previous week in Bardstown, where a Nelson County Circuit Court judge granted Heaven Hill's request for a restraining order limiting the strike activities of union workers. The order bans picketers from blocking entrances to Heaven Hill's bottling and maturation facilities in Nelson County, burning anything within 250 feet of those facilities and warehouses, and harassing those who enter or exit. The Kentucky Standard reports Heaven Hill accused the union of damaging trucks going in and out of its facilities. The judge refused to block picketers from the public roadways that go through the Heaven Hill main campus, but warned union leaders that crossing the road when trucks try to pull in will not be tolerated. In other news, Scotland's Springbank Distillers has confirmed plans for a third distillery in Campbelltown. J&A Mitchell's flagship Springbank Distillery will celebrate its 200th anniversary 7 years from now in 2028. The company's goal is to have that new distillery open in time for the anniversary celebrations, as J&A Mitchell's Ranald Watson told us last Friday night on the Happy Hour Live webcast.
It's an intention, it's not a firm, we can't tell you where it's going to be, what size it's going to be, who's going to build it or anything. Finley's still to work on all of that, but it is our intention to add a third distillery to the company portfolio within the next half a dozen or so years. Whether we open it in time for the 200th anniversary or whether we start building it on the 200th anniversary is still to be decided as well.
So you're basically teasing us right now.
a little bit. We had a lot of plans for the company that were to an extent put on hold during the beginnings of COVID and the pandemic and stuff. So there's a bit of catching up to do. So had it not been for the pandemic, we might have been slightly further down the road on this than we are now. But building another distillery while you're still running two and an independent bottler is going to be, it's going to be a big addition to the workload. So we want to take our time and make sure we do it right.
You can watch the entire Happy Hour Live webcast with Ranald Watson and Springbank production director Findlay Ross on the WhiskyCast YouTube channel, and the podcast version will be coming out in a couple of days. Springbank has also announced 2 other moves to improve the distillery's sustainability for the future. As of now, the distillery's 10, 12, and 15-year-old single malts, along with Longrow Peated, Hazelburn 10-year-old, and the Kilkerran single malts from sister distillery Glengyle, will all be shipped without what's being described as unnecessary packaging, like cardboard boxes and tubes. In addition, the distilleries will stop using red diesel fuel for boilers and switch to LP gas, while also looking at ways to reduce water usage. Last time around, we had the story on Pernod Ricard's acquisition spree in the American whiskey business. The day after that episode dropped, Pernod Ricard dropped another acquisition bombshell. It is buying the Whiskey Exchange in London from founders Sukhinder and Rajbir Singh for an undisclosed amount. The deal also includes the Specialty Drinks Distribution Unit, the Whisky.auction online auction site, and the Whiskey Show events in London, including the one going on this weekend. It does not include the distillery currently under construction on Islay, the Elixir Distillers Independent Bottling Unit, or Specialty Brands. That's the UK importer for Amrut, Cavallan, Waterford, and other spirits brands. Pernod Ricard plans to use the acquisition to beef up its e-commerce operations. Sukhinder and Rajbir Singh have agreed to stay on as joint managing directors for at least the next 3 years. In other news, Redbreast has unveiled its new Iberian series, highlighting the Irish whiskey brand's connections with Spain and Portugal. The new limited edition Pedro Jimenez edition will join the Lustau edition in the Iberian series. It's a collaboration with the Antonio Paez Labato cooperage in Spain, which supplied the PX seasoned casks used for this edition. As Irish Distillers master blender Billy Layton told Whiskey Writers the other day during the launch.
We've recasked a vatting of bourbon and Oloroso into these lovely Pedro Jimenez hogsheads from the beautiful region of Andalusia. Been in those casks for 12 to 22 months. And just for me, it's simply another stunning example of how Ireland and Iberia's rich heritages, they combine to create whiskies that are just extraordinary.
Future editions in the Iberian series could include other types of sherry casks as well as port wine casks. The new edition is available now in Ireland and soon in the UK, Finland, and global travel retail, and it'll be in the US next month, with a recommended retail price of €80 a bottle. I'll have my tasting notes for it in a few minutes. Also in Ireland, Waterford Distillery has unveiled its first Cuvée edition. It's the first blending of Waterford whiskies made with barley from different farms around Ireland. The initial Waterford releases were single farm bottlings using whiskey from a single farm's crop of barley, but the Cuvée uses barley from 25 different farms. It's already out in Europe and the UK, and it's expected to arrive in the US soon. October 1st has become the traditional day that Isla's Bruichladdich Distillery releases its annual Octomore series of heavily peated single malts, and this past Friday saw the debut of the Octomore 12 series. All three are 5 years old. 12.1 is matured exclusively in first fill ex-bourbon barrels. 12.2 is a combination of first and second fill ex-bourbon barrels vatted together 2 years ago and finished in first fill French oak Sauterne wine casks, while 12.3 is made with 100% Isla barley from the nearby Octomore farm. It's matured in a combination of ex-bourbon and first-fill Pedro Jimenez sherry butts. Bruichladich's Adam Hennett described the Octomore philosophy during a Zoom call with whiskey writers on Friday.
You can't really control it. You can't set a specific amount of peat over a specific time to give you a specific ppm, that phenol content. It just is what it is. And so Beds Maltings, who supply the malt for us, for Octomore, but they do that malting process for us. They just try and get as much peat as they can into that grain. And then from there, they'll be able to, for different suppliers, they'll be able to mix unpeated in to give them a specific ppm. But we, of course, want to the uncut stuff, push it as heavy peated as we possibly could for Octomore.
Now for those all-important ppm numbers. 12.1 is the most heavily peated of the three at 130.8 parts per million of phenols. 12.2 comes in at 129.7 ppm, while 12.3 is the lightest of the three. It's only 118.1 ppm, and by comparison, that's still twice as peaty as Bruichladich's Port Charlotte malts. Because the travel retail market still has yet to recover from pandemic-related travel restrictions, there will not be a travel retail exclusive Octomore this year. All three will be available at whiskey shops worldwide. And I'll have tasting notes for all three soon at the WhiskyCast website. The Macallan has added a 30-year-old expression to its double cask range. It's matured in a combination of sherry-seasoned American and European oak casks and will be available worldwide. The suggested retail price in the U.S. is $4,000 a bottle. Highland Park has revived its 15-year-old single malt, but with a completely new style. The new 15-year-old Viking Heart uses a combination of first-fill European and American oak sherry-seasoned casks, along with some refill casks. It'll be available worldwide. The recommended retail price in the U.S., $110 a bottle. Earlier this year, longtime Glen Grant distillery manager Dennis Malcolm joined us on the eve of his 60th anniversary at the distillery last April, and we mentioned the plans to release a special whiskey honoring the occasion. The Dennis Malcolm 60th Anniversary Edition is a 60-year-old single cask that was filled on October 24th, 1960. It's the oldest distillery bottling of Glen Grant yet. Only 360 decanters will be available starting next month. The price tag, £25,000 each. I've mentioned a number of distilleries celebrating their 10th anniversaries in recent weeks. British Columbia's Shelter Point Distillery is another one, marking a decade of distilling with its first 10-year-old release. It's a 10-year-old single malt bottled at 58.7% ABV. I received a sample the other day, and I'll have my tasting notes for it soon at the WhiskyCast website. Speaking of celebrations, the U.S. won golf's Ryder Cup last weekend over the challengers from Europe. But even before the decisive victory, Jim Beam released a special Ryder Cup edition bottling of Jim Beam Black, featuring scenes from Whistling Straits in Wisconsin. It's available at retailers in Wisconsin and 8 other states for $22.99 a bottle. Finally, the whiskey fabric lost one of its best people the other day, and I lost a good friend. Peter Silver was one of the original malt maniacs and a mentor to many whiskey lovers, and that is just scraping the surface. He was also known as the Jazz Dentist. He moonlighted as a trumpeter with his big band Blue Nitrous. Peter had been battling numerous health issues for several years before his death the other day. Rest well, my friend. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. I need to take just a minute to explain what's been happening around here the last few days. Last Monday morning, as I was getting ready to record this episode, I stood up at my desk to adjust the air purifier that was just out of reach. My desk is U-shaped, and that'll become important in just a second. Because when I sat back down, my desk chair rolled out from underneath me, and I fell backward. I slammed the back of my head on the edge of the desk behind me, and have been recovering from a concussion ever since. A CAT scan did come back negative, and I have been getting a little better each day, but I've been under orders to only use my screens on the computer and phone, an iPad, and the laptop, and the TV for just a few minutes at a time at most. And that's why this episode isn't out until now. I am still taking it easy. I'm not completely 100% yet. But I do want to thank everyone for the well wishes I've received on social media over the last few days, and my family for putting up with me. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events, and we'd like to welcome back our friends at Catoctin Creek Distilling as the sponsor for the calendar of events segment each week here on WhiskyCast. First of all, COVID outbreaks in Australia have forced the cancellation of this weekend's Whisky Live in Adelaide, along with the events in Brisbane and Perth next month. In addition, January's Victoria Whisky Festival in Canada is now being scaled back to include just 4 days of master classes and tastings from January 13th through the 16th, but there will not be the large-scale consumer and VIP tastings again this year. Part 1 of the Stockholm Beer and Whiskey Festival has also been cut back this weekend. It'll run from this Thursday through Saturday. Bourbon's Bistro in Louisville, Kentucky has a Michter's Bourbon Dinner on Wednesday night, and Julio's Liquors in Westboro, Massachusetts hosts a Judgment of Westland Whiskey Wednesday tasting that same night. Decanter number 1 of Gordon and MacPhail's Generations Glenlivet 80 Years Old goes on the auction block Thursday for charity at Sotheby's in Hong Kong. The Whiskey Colours Festival is this weekend in Dufton, Scotland, and Whiskey and Barrel Night is set for Saturday in Washington, D.C. Keep in mind that all in-person events are still subject to change on short notice, depending on local health requirements, and may require you to show proof of vaccination and or a recent negative COVID test to attend. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. Just use the contact form at the WhiskyCast website to get in touch with us. We'll be glad to add it to our searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit their new BuyVirginiaRye.com website for more details. And please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Oban and the Classic Malts lineup. Blenders have one of the toughest jobs in the whiskey business. Not only do they have to keep longtime brands on the path with consistency from batch to batch, but they also have to come up with fresh takes on those brands. Take, for instance, Royal Salute from Chivas Brothers, created to celebrate the coronation of Queen Elizabeth back in 1953, and like the Queen, getting close to a 70th anniversary. Sandy Hyslop is the latest in a short list of master blenders over that time, responsible for the various Royal Salute expressions. His latest task was to create an all-new take on the brand for the debut of the Couture Collection, matching the whiskey to a bespoke flagon created by noted British designer Richard Quinn. He's also the head of blending for Chivas Brothers, and we talked about that challenge the other day on Zoom. Why Richard Quinn? What does he bring to the table? And what did you tell him before he went to work on this project?
That's a really good question, Mark, because this was a very different project for me, because Richard Quinn was a perfect fit for us. Richard Quinn is a very competent, up-and-coming designer. He's British. He was awarded the Design Award from the Queen back in 2018. We love his designs. And probably for the first time ever, Mark, I've designed a whiskey around a design of a packaging. I've never done it that way before. I've always when I make a whiskey, we design a whiskey, we make a whiskey, we formulate it together, and then marketing and packaging development, then go and build it around it. So it's probably the first time I've done it the other way around in my 38 years in the business. I've never worked with, this is Richard Quinn's design for the Royal Salute flagon. He designed this amazing design with, lovely, beautiful flowers, but that edgy thorns in there as well. It was just amazing. And everyone was saying, right, now we've got this design, Sandy, we want you to make something. We want you to make a bespoke Royal Salute blend for this one-of limited edition and tailor it to the packaging. So yeah, quite a new territory for me. Usually I'm leading from the front with the blend, and then everything falls in behind. So yeah, it was a very, very interesting project for me. And obviously, I absolutely love Richard Quinn's designs. I think he's great. Royal Salute is such an amazing British brand, been available since 1953 at 21 years old. Never been another whiskey. It's the only whiskey in the world that's been continuously available at 21 years since 1953. Great British heritage, and to be able to get an up-and-coming British designer was perfect for us.
So walk me through the mechanics of how you create a blend to fit an existing design, because normally when you do a blend, you're blending to taste and nose and yes, trying to create a blend that works together. But in this case, you're trying to complement his design.
Absolutely, you've nailed it. That's exactly was the situation for me. So, number one for me, Mark, it needed to be recognisably in the Royal Salute family style. Anyone who loves Royal Salute 21-year-old signature blend, I want them to try this new Royal Salute Richard Quinn edition and get some of that DNA, but with an extra twist, with an extra dimension added to it. So it was getting something that was rich, that was sweet, but I desperately wanted to go for an aromatic, fragrant blossom note in there with a little bit of that toasted oak as well. I wanted it to have all those lovely sweet floral flavours, but I wanted it to have a little bit of an edge of that toasted oak coming through as well. So it was very different, and for me, Mark, quite unusual to be producing that kind of flavour in something so old as 21 years old. 21 years old and older whiskies are not renowned for having floral notes. So that was the challenge for me, to get into that and build something up in the blending room that would fit the bill.
How much work did you have to go through going through your samples and the inventory to see what you had that might work at 21 years old?
The blend has over 31 malt and grain whiskies in it, Mark. This is no lightweight whiskey. This is 31 different malts and grains. Every single cask that's gone into the blend was sampled and brought up to the blending room, and we built up the blend in miniature. I reformulated about 4 or 5 times before I got the level of that sweet floral flavour coming through in the final blend. So that there were a few different formulations before I got there. And start to finish, it's probably about 4 months, Mark, of getting the samples in, doing a few different formulations, building the blend up in miniature in the blending room, then bringing all the casks in, nosing them, emptying them, putting them together and blending it. So, yeah, there was a fair bit of trial and error. I would probably say maybe 500 samples were brought into the sample room to give me a bit of breadth of flavour so that I could work with different... You know just as well as anybody, Mark, you know these things, that it's all very well using different whiskies, but the cask type's really important as well at that age. They've got a big part to play, more than 50% of the flavours coming from that cask. So it's really important you get the right makes. I've got Longmorn single malt in here. I've got Strathyla. I've got Dumbarton single grain, Caperdonic, Imperial, lots of distilleries that no longer exist, but also the key and hidden fingerprint in here is Breval Distillery. That is the one that's bringing that floral flavour. Breval matured in first fill American oak barrels. It's just wonderful. It was just it was the icing on the cake to bring that sweet floral toasted oak flavour coming through.
How did you account for the thorns?
I'm kind of saying it's that sort of that the edginess is coming from the sort of the toasted oak. That toasted oak's a bit nutty as well. That sort of that toasted hazelnut. It's like milk chocolate toasted hazelnut, and that's what I loved about it. On the nose, you're getting that sweet floral flavour. Whenever you taste it, you're getting that lovely honey. You're getting sweet milk chocolate, and you're getting a bit of that hazelnut toasted oak in there as well. And I think that's for me, the florals, the sweet Breval, but that toasted oak is the thorns for me.
Do you hang on to some of these older whiskies, knowing that they don't work, say, with the regular Royal Salute 21?
Yes.
In that recipe, but knowing that you're going to do these occasional bespoke editions and saying, okay, this might work in, say, the Richard Quinn edition or in a future Couture Collection release. It doesn't work with what I'm doing on a daily basis for Royal Salute 21, but this is going to work in the future. Yeah, that's a great question. There's 2 parts to my job, Mark, and producing Royal Salute 21-year-old signature blend, my biggest responsibility is making sure that the quality is correct and making sure that the continuity is right year on year. To make this Richard Quinn limited edition, this is a one-off. It's almost like the shackles are removed for this. I don't have to worry about making it next year or making it the year after. All I need to do is make an absolutely amazing one-off whiskey. So it kind of makes my job that little bit easier because there is Breval in the signature edition, but I've dialed the Breval right up in this Richard Quinn edition to give it that real paying homage to the decanter, to be able for them to complement each other perfectly. So we're really, really lucky at Royal Salute to have amazing inventory. We've got lots and lots of inventory. I said to you, 31 different individual malt and grain whiskies in this Richard Quinn edition, which is a broad spectrum of different malts and grain whiskies to deal with and to be able to bring together. But yeah, the Longmorn's really important here. That creamy toffee, the flavour that comes through in the signature blend, that's a really important malt whiskey in there. Dumbarton Grain Distillery, we're really lucky to still be sitting on significant stocks. We're at the risk of showing off, but we've been doing this for so long and laying down stocks for Royal Salute. We're pretty good. To answer your question directly that you asked, we're pretty good at covering other eventualities. And I have I like to call it in the team, I have a strategic reserve that I have
casks within the inventory that I've picked up, that I've nosed, that I've seen when I've been doing operations, that I've taken out and laid aside over the years. So I have a sort of secret store of stuff that I can dip back into if I need it for doing special one-off limited editions. So I do have the luxury of having a great inventory to pick from, but I do pick stuff out and put it on that strategic reserve.
And then hope that somebody doesn't screw up and put it into a regular blend?
Well, they wouldn't want the wrath of Sandy Hyslop, so it probably won't happen, Mark.
So, has Richard tasted this yet?
Yes, I believe he has. Yes, yes, he has. Yes.
What was his feedback?
My feedback is he loves it. Yeah, he really likes it. Yeah. He was very. He's worked incredibly well with the Royal Salute marketing team. They've really enjoyed the experience of working with them, and I'd like to think that it's the start of a great relationship. Everybody in my team is so proud of this new blend that we've put together, and every single one of my blending team, bar none, have asked me how on earth can we get our hands on a bottle of this, because it's just absolutely beautiful. Whiskey's amazing. The packaging is beautiful. They just complement each other perfectly.
While we're talking about packaging, you guys just went through a major redesign for the flagship Chivas blends too, right?
Indeed, yes, absolutely, yes.
How much inspiration do you go through or do your design teams go through from the whiskeys you're creating, because you're not changing the whiskeys inside the bottle, you're just changing the packaging?
Absolutely. In fact, if I'm to be honest with you, Mark, from a master blender perspective, I had very, very little input at all to the new packaging. I'm just completely focused on quality and continuity, making sure that the blend's the same year after year. I want that quality to be spot on and to make sure that I'm laying down stock for the future. I've got to that sort of time in my career now with Royal Salute and with Chivas that the new distillate that we're laying down is now going to be used when I'm retired. It'll be the next master blender. So a lot of my job on high-aged blend is leaving the house in good order for the next man. Blend it year on year. My job is absolutely to blend it year on year, but also to leave the house in good order for the next blender.
You said for the next man. That could also be for the next woman too, right?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes. We have some very good boys and girls in the blending team that are all showing very, very good aptitude for nosing and blending whiskey.
How do you go through the process of selecting an heir apparent? Because I know that the bosses have to have a succession plan in mind in case you get hit by a bus or something crossing the street. How do you go through the process of deciding who your heir apparent might be?
Probably have a few candidates that could be considered for my job. That is always high risk, Mark. Some of the younger generation these days will move from company to company, and whiskey's it's very old fashioned in that respect. That I've been 38 years with the one company and working with a brand. I'm incredibly proud to be responsible for Royal Salute. I absolutely can't believe back in 1983 I could never have dreamed of being responsible for such a prestigious brand. And I think I need to be looking at people's capability, but I also need to be looking about their passion, Mark. I need to see that they're passionate about Scotch whisky. They're passionate about the whiskies we produce. They're passionate about the quality of the new distillate that we're laying down, the casks that we're buying. So it's about keeping an eye on people in the business and making sure. But please bear in mind, when I retire, Mark, there will be 21 years worth of Royal Salute inventory in warehouse ready to go. So like the previous master blender that I took over from, he's leaving the house in good order. So the new master blender, I've done a lot of the work for them for the next person coming in. So there'll be 21 years worth of inventory sitting there ready to blend. They need to make sure that they're starting to lay down the stuff and then put the mature whiskies together correctly.
So what did Colin Scott teach you that you still have yet to teach to your staff? Knowing that you've got to keep them around for a few more years and keep them from being poached by somebody else, what secrets has he taught you before he retired that you still have yet to pass on?
I think I'm not so sure about exact secrets, but as far as, teamwork is massively important. And I think having every single member of the blending team involved in the formulation process makes it really interesting and exciting. When you're doing new expressions like this Royal Salute 21-year-old Richard Quinn, everybody got a chance to see the formulations. Everybody got a chance to put their input. Not one single person within my team is allocated to a specific brand. Everybody, when you finish your project, you will not necessarily be working on Royal Salute the next time. You might be working on Chivas. You might be working on Ballantine's. You could be doing an Aberlour special project at Glenlivet. And I think that keeps it really interesting, and it gives them a real breadth of experience. The first quarter of the year, you could be immersed in American oak barrels and an aged blend. And the next quarter, you're right up to your neck in Oloroso sherry casks and PX casks. And I think that's where the advantage of working across a wide portfolio really makes the job interesting. And I never hear any of my team go, "No, this is boring." And touch wood, I've been really lucky, Mark. I don't have a high turnover of staff at all. People tend to come to the blending team and stay with us for a long time. Myself, my blending manager, and my blending team leader have over 100 years experience with the company between the three of us. That's, in my opinion, Mark, that's a good strong front row.
That's a record to build on. What do you look for when you're adding somebody to the team, though? When you do have one of those openings, what are you looking for?
I'm looking for, like I probably touched it on already, I'm looking for really good organoleptic ability. No one's going to come and join my team without an organoleptic assessment and a test to make sure that they can not only differentiate flavours, they can describe them to a level. We can shape them and build them over the years to help build their vocabulary and their flavour book within their head of how they describe things. But I've touched on it already. I want them to be interested in whiskey. I don't want somebody rocking up for an interview with me that's never been to a distillery, that can't tell me about 4 or 5, 6, 7 different whiskey brands. I want them to be interested in the first place. It's not, what am I trying to say? It's not a job, it's a vacation. Do you understand what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And I see it all the time, across my team, where I have a cask management team, an inventory team, a planning team, technical laboratory team. All these people get their input into bringing together the big picture of making amazing whiskies and doing that continually year in, year out.
Let me just switch for a quick second now, because you've had the chance finally to get your hands on some of the aged whiskey from Dalminock, the newest Chivas Brothers distillery down in Speyside. Yes. How's that stuff coming along? I got to try an independent bottling a couple of months ago of one and thought it was really nice, but how's that young spirit coming along from Dalminock?
Yeah, but I'm really happy with Dalminock. It's coming together. I was obviously heavily involved in the design process and the flavour that we wanted from the distillery. I wanted the distillery to be that classic Speyside style. I wanted it to be fruity, but I wanted it to have I wanted it to be, how best can I describe it for you? I wanted it to be Longmorn's cousin. I wanted it to have some of that Longmorn in there, but with the fruit dialed right up. I wanted the fruit dialed right up with a bit of that creamy toffee in there as well, so that not only I wanted it to be super versatile. I wanted it to be something that could be launched as a single malt in years to come in a more grandiose fashion, but also I wanted it to be a really important ingredient across the portfolio of blends. I wanted it to be something that was very, very useful for me in building up foundation of blends. And Longmorn is a real foundation blend across all our portfolio. It's an incredibly important single malt whiskey.
When they tell you that we're going to build a new distillery, would you rather have a single setup like Dalminock has, or would you advocate for a Rose Isle type setup where they can make a whole bunch of different styles to match up with what you need in the blending process for the future? You guys don't have, for instance, anything on Islay, so you've got to do something peaty somewhere else or get it through trades. Does it make sense to have the ability to produce a bunch of different styles of whiskey that you'd like to have?
It's a very interesting question. I think that no, I would rather have a consistent product from Dalmunich. It is a sizable distillery. I need to have something consistent. If I'm going to do experimentation, I'm going to do it at Scapa. I'm going to do it where I can do it on a small scale. I can isolate it. If I'm looking to produce peaty whiskey, Altabane is the best distillery for producing that. So we tend to run 6 months a year on peat and 6 months a year on plain at Altabane. So that gives us a stock of peated whiskey coming in. Don't get me wrong, we also trade with our competitors as well. So I'm bringing Islay whiskey into the portfolio. Honestly, I could go on all day about all the skullduggery that's going in the background to bring in different flavours into the portfolio and to lay them down for Royal Salute. It's a huge commitment laying it down for 21 years. So we're, every single year I'm sitting down working, sitting with my inventory manager. My inventory manager, Fiona, is an absolute genius with spreadsheets and working out all my harebrained schemes. She turns them into reality, and she's just amazing at keeping me right on track of how we're going to keep everything together and make sure that the whiskey's the right place, the right time, laid down in the right type of casks as well to make sure. So there is a whiskey formula, and if we circle right back to this Royal Salute edition, there is a whiskey formula and there's a cask formula, and they're both just as important as each other.
Sounds like we need to talk to Fiona one of these days.
Absolutely. I'd advocate that. Yep, we need to get Fiona on the call. She would love that. Yeah, she's the lady that keeps me in line when I come up with all my crazy ideas. She's like, "Oh my goodness, Sandy, we're going to have to rein you in."
By the way, the Royal Salute Couture Collection Richard Quinn edition was unveiled the other day during London Fashion Week. It'll be on sale at select retailers worldwide with a recommended retail price of $250 a bottle. The second release in the Couture collection is coming next year, but Sandy wouldn't share any details, something about having to face the wrath of Hyslop if I shared them with you. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Oban. Every sip of Oban is like a postcard from Scotland, whether it's the classic Oban 14-year-old, the 18-year-old, Oban Little Bay, or the Distiller's Edition. Every drop comes from the coastal town of Oban and a distillery just 206 steps away from the sea. It's one of Scotland's smallest distilleries, with just 7 people who make whiskey the same way their predecessors have since 1794. Find out more at obanwhiskey.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. And I need to note that all of these tasting notes were done before I got the concussion. Let's start off with the Redbreast Iberian Series Pedro Jimenez edition that we heard about during the news. It's bottled at 46% ABV. The nose has a nice fruity character with touches of figs, dates, plums, and a hint of raisins, along with muted spices and a touch of roasted cashews. The taste is thick and nectar-like with baking spices, honey, figs, dates, raisins, and toasted oak, while the long finish has gently fading spices, balanced nicely by touches of dark fruits. I'm scoring the Redbreast Pedro Jimenez edition a 93. A couple of weeks ago, the Irish Distillers team unleashed the first Method and Madness whiskey, distilled at Middleton's experimental micro-distillery, just across the courtyard from the old Middleton Distillery. This one is made with rye and malt, only it's double distilled in pot stills instead of the usual triple distillation. It's also matured in ex-bourbon barrels and bottled at 46% ABV. The nose has a nice balance of straw, grilled fruits, baking spices, honey, dried flowers, and just a hint of beefiness. The taste is thick and toasty with white pepper, a hint of chili powder, toasted wood, honey, and dried fruits. The finish is subtle and lingers nicely with a good maltiness and hints of spices. I'm scoring the Method and Madness Rye and Malt Whiskey a 92. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. They're reviving the tradition of Maryland-style rye at their Baltimore farm and waterfront distillery. In-person tastings are available once again at the distillery in Baltimore, but you'll also find a variety of virtual tours, tastings, and other experiences at the Sagamore Spirit website. They're offering WhiskyCast listeners a free virtual guided tasting. Purchase bottles from your local retailer, and a Sagamore Spirit teammate will guide you through each one. Visit SagamoreSpirit.com and use the code WhiskyCast, all one word, to access. Please drink responsibly. Now let's look at the third release of Ardbegg's 19-year-old Trey single malt. The 2021 edition is bottled at 46.2% ABV and has a slightly different mix of casks from the two previous editions. The nose on this one has peat smoke and grilled fruits, along with touches of honey, caramel, and heather. The taste is both smoky and spicy, with a tangy touch of grilled citrus, baking spices, peat smoke, toasted caramel, and a hint of orange peel that comes out as the spices start to fade. The finish is long and smoky with lingering spices and hints of orange peel and toasted caramel. I'm scoring the 2021 edition of Ardbegg's Trey a 93. And let's finish up with the oldest distillery bottling of Talisker on record, the 43-year-old Expedition Oak. As I mentioned earlier this year when it was released, the whiskey is finished in specially made casks using staves that sailed across the Atlantic with explorer James Aiken. Those staves were exposed to the sea and air on his yacht's deck before being turned back into barrels. It's bottled at 49.7% ABV. The nose has hints of spice, red apples, candle wax, and a kiss of smoke, along with wet beach sand and a hint of brine. The taste is luscious and well-balanced, with touches of red apples and tropical fruits, complemented nicely by peppercorns and a subtle hint of brine in the background. The finish is long and peppery with tropical fruits, and the touch of campfire smoke in the background. I'm scoring the Talisker 43-year-old Expedition Oak a 94. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I've added these whiskeys to our searchable list of tasting notes for more than 3,200 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
It's been 175 years and Dewar's continues to stay curious. We're proud to announce the newest addition to the innovative Dewar's 8-year cask-finish series of Scotch whiskey, Dewar's Japanese Smooth. Brought to life by our award-winning master blender Stephanie McLeod, Japanese Smooth is a perfectly balanced 8-year-old Scotch whiskey that puts a pioneering and innovative focus on our aging process. After 8 years in Scotland, we blend, age again, then finish this whiskey in cask made from 200-year-old Mizunara oak trees. Rare, sure, but worth it. The Mizunara oak perfectly complements the tasty notes with Dewar's Scotch whiskey. Japanese Smooth is loaded with Dewar's signature honey and floral notes, with the Japanese Mizunara oak adding exotic sweet and spicy flavors. Curious? Try this one in a perfect Japanese highball or on the rocks.
Let's open up the inbox now for your voice. Last time around, I asked you to share your ideas on what you'd like your family to do with your whiskey collection when you die. And I have to admit that I'm still feeling really guilty about the timing of that question. As I mentioned during the news, my good friend and fellow whiskey lover Peter Silver died the other day, the day after that episode was released. So while we had the usual suggestions about Viking funerals and big blowout wakes, there were some more sentimental suggestions, and those are the ones I'm going to highlight. From @Drew7182 on Twitter, open and enjoy at the wake, and if I've got enough to go around, people each taking a bottle to create their own memories with. I don't want them to be a sad memory of someone who's gone, but rather an opportunity to make new memories with others. Well said. From Matt McGinnis on Twitter, I'd like my family to open as many bottles as people want to drink at my life celebration. Let my friends and family each take a bottle of their choice home afterward. Judd Laughter emailed this from Tennessee. Hey, Mark, it's an important question to think about. Here's one answer I was a part of a few years ago. George passed away, leaving a moderate collection of opened and unopened bottles. The unopened bottles were offered at a charity auction. With the opened bottles, I curated 2 whiskey tastings using what was left in those bottles. The blind auction flyer is attached. It was a great way to remember George and enjoy what he had collected. Cheers, Judd. And he included the auction flyer, which had a tasting of premium whiskies for 6 people at $50 per person, and a tasting of whiskies and other spirits for 10 people at $20 each, with all of the proceeds going to charity. From Niall Tubridy in Ireland via Facebook, it's a poignant question, Mark. I have already come to an agreement with an old friend of many years to dispose of my collection through the right channels. I trust he'll achieve the market value, funds raised to my family. What does he get for his efforts? 4 particular bottles that we've agreed on already. And from Matthew Crumpler in Virginia, I don't care what happens to my whiskey. I want my body used to grow an oak tree. That tree used to make a bourbon barrel. After the bourbon has been aged, I want that barrel to be used for a smoky Islay Scotch. That's a wish that could take a few generations to grant. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always find us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address, comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. You're hearing the term sherry seasoned cask used more and more from whiskey makers. But what exactly does that mean? Well, first we need to look at just how sherry casks became so much a part of the Scotch whiskey industry. 30 years ago this year, the Spanish government started requiring all sherries to be bottled in Spain. Sort of like the 2009 law that requires all single malt Scotch whiskies to be bottled in Scotland. Before 1981, it was common for sherry bodegas to ship their wine in casks around the world, and a lot of those casks made their way to Great Britain's wine and spirits merchants like Gordon and MacPhail and Berry Brothers and Rudd, just to name a couple. After the sherry was bottled, the casks were then reused for maturing whiskies in Scotland. Those casks were often known as transport casks because they were made from thicker wood that could withstand the stress of being shipped without breaking. For instance, the cask that held Gordon and MacPhail's Generations Glenlivet 80-year-old single malt was one of those transport casks. But once the ban on shipping sherry outside of Spain in barrels took effect, well, the sherry industry didn't need a whole lot of casks anymore. Since the bodegas use the traditional Solera style of maturation, in which casks are regauged with wine from other casks, there aren't that many barrels that actually leave the bodegas anymore. In fact, most of the cooperages in Spain now have whiskey makers as their main customers. The distilleries have the barrels made to their specifications, and the cooperages arrange to loan them out to bodegas to be, quote, seasoned with sherry for a couple of years, maybe longer, depending on the distillery. After that, the barrels go back to their owners to be filled with new make spirit or to be used as finishing casks. What happens to the sherry after that 2 years or so? Well, since it picked up a lot of oak influence, it may not be what the bodegas need for their own production, so it either gets dumped or might be used to season another batch of casks. After all, the sherry market isn't quite what it used to be. If there's something or someone you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskeycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot. The tears of Ireland's great writers bursting with flavour, humour and angst. Bottled for you to taste. No writers were harmed in the making of this premium Irish whiskey. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and of course a complete archive of all of our past episodes going all the way back to November of 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever go out drinking with a peacock? Always the same. Few too many, tail feathers come out, drinks get knocked over, bartender's not happy, night's over before it started. All I'm saying is, don't be the peacock in your group.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Just like the end of this WhiskyCast episode, Dewar's Scotch Whiskey always makes for a smooth finish. Like our newly released Dewar's Japanese Smooth, aged for 8 years in Scotland, blended then aged again before being finished for up to 6 months in Mizunar oak casks made from 200-year-old Japanese water oak trees. These unique casks layer distinct dry and spicy flavors to the whiskey, with aromas reminiscent of sandalwood and incense. Keep an eye out for a bottle of Dewar's Japanese Smooth at a store near you.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2021, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening, and please stay safe, especially when you sit down.